All right, so 1974, Young Frankenstein. I think this right here is it's my favorite Mel Brooks movie, probably his best. What do you think?
Well, I think he said the same thing. He said he thought that this was his best film overall as a film. He did right around that time. He had some considerable success. The same year that Young Frankenstein came out was the year The Blazing Saddles came out. So he was really going, uh, uh, full thruster at a certain point. As far as being a recognizable comedian on TV, which he had been for years,
Yeah.
he he was on Sid Caesar's writing staff for Your Show of Shows with Woody Allen and Neil Simon. I think were two of the other writers. And I think Larry Gelbart was also on that in that group. And Brooks had a couple of successful films before, uh, Blazing Saddles and Young Frankenstein. He did The Producers, which I don't know if it was a big box office success, but it certainly was a terrific film.
Yeah.
And it's still remembered. And of course, years later, they did the musical of that, which was a big hit. And they also tried the same thing with Young Frankenstein, which I think wasn't quite as big a success. But yeah, he was all around for a while there, and I only learned when I was researching this for this episode that he was approached by Gene Wilder with a script. Gene Wilder had worked on Blazing Saddles and
Blazing
had worked
Saddles,
on
yeah.
and The Producers, so he was used to working with Gene. But
I think he said he would only do Blazing Saddles if Mel Brooks agreed to do this movie, which
oh,
turned
is
out
that
to be
right?
Young
Yeah.
Frankenstein. I think it's how it went.
Well, the story I heard was that they were Gene Wilder's agent told him, "What do you think about doing a movie with Peter Boyle and Marty Feldman?" I think it was Boyle and Feldman, two people who he had just started to represent. And Peter Boyle had had a big success with Joe, which was a Oscar-nominated film about the hard hat guy dealing with the hippies. I don't know if you've ever heard of that one.
No, I've never seen that one.
That was his first big success. He might have been nominated for Best Actor for that. I'm not sure. Anyway, he was up and coming, and Marty Feldman was up and coming at that point. Feldman had had some success on British television, quite a bit of success on British television.
Was he on any of the Monty Python? Was he on part of
well,
that? Not part of the group, but was he on any of the movies or anything?
No, he was in a show that some of the Pythons participated in before they did Python.
No, okay.
There was something called what was it? Finally, the 1968 show, something like that. It was like a sketch program. I guess it had some new stuff in it. Anyway, he was part of that. And then he went on and he did a show which was syndicated in the United States, Marty Feldman's Comedy Machine or something like that, which Larry Gelbart was also involved with that. Barry Levinson was involved with that. And Spike Milligan, this British comedian who was part of the Goon Show, which also inspired the Pythons. Marty Feldman would go on and do, I don't know, I think he died before he got to do it, or he died in the middle of doing it, Yellowbeard, which was Graham Chapman's film, which also had some of the Pythons, Eric Idle and John Cleese. From what I read about that film, Marty Feldman might have been lucky to have died when he did. But anyway, he arguably, maybe him and Gene Wilder could be said to be big stars of Young Frankenstein.
Oh yeah,
because I remember that certainly as a kid, that was a big inducement to go to see the film that Marty Feldman was in. We always found him very funny on television. He's the guy with the crazy eyes. The kids immediately are interested in anybody who has a physical deformity of any kind. But the cast for Young Frankenstein was, anyway, I should finish my first story. The agent for Gene Wilder suggested that he work with Peter Boyle and Marty Feldman because he was representing them. And Gene Wilder said, well, I have this script and it might be good for them. And then the guy said, this is great after you read it. Why don't we take this to Mel Brooks? So I guess he also represented. And Gene Wilder assumed, based on his experience with Brooks, that he wouldn't be interested because he wants to do his own stuff. It turns out he was interested. I guess Brooks shared Gene Wilder's affection and nostalgia for the old Universal monster films. So Brooks came on board, and at some point, I guess he contributed enough that he ended up with co-screenwriting credit.
Yeah, I think I need to recry what I heard. I think I got confused about. Gene Wilder said he would do this movie if Mel Brooks didn't have a part in the film.
Oh, okay.
He didn't want him to cameo in the movie because he thought it would take away from the film. You know,
he was probably right in that regard.
Yeah.
The cast is so terrific as it is; you really don't need anybody else. And it probably does free a guy like Mel Brooks. Probably is a different person when he's directing than when he's performing. So it frees him up from any sort of concern about, being funny on camera. He can just worry about what to do behind the camera. And I have to say, this is a very well-made film. It really completely duplicates almost. It's supposed to be a parody. It's a little larger than the original Universal films, but it certainly, there are moments in it where you feel if you just sort of chop this out and put it in one of those old films.
Oh, you wouldn't even notice it. Yeah, it don't even feel like a parody to me. It almost feels like just a movie they made back in the 30s that just happened to be funny. You know what I'm saying?
Well, I think that's actually a good point, because I think the reason why it is so funny is that this is one of those comedies where nobody, with the exception of maybe Marty Feldman, nobody seems to be aware that they're in a comedy.
Yeah, everybody else is, especially Gene Wilder, just playing it serious.
Right. When his opening scenes, when he's giving those lectures, it's completely convincing as a doctor speaking about the human body.
Mr. Hilltop here, with whom I have never worked nor given any prior instructions to, has graciously offered his services for this afternoon's demonstration. Mr. Hilltop, would you hop up on your feet and stand beside this table? Nice hopping.
And it's because we accepted that the reality of it, that the stuff that follows is funny, right?
Yeah.
The business with him being the old man,
Reflex movements are those which are made independently of the will, but are carried out along pathways which pass between the peripheral nervous system and the central nervous system. You filthy, rotten, yellow son of a bitch! We are not...
Or his anger at being called Frankenstein instead of Frankenstein.
I have one question, Dr. Frankenstein.
That's Frankenstein.
I beg your pardon?
My name, it's pronounced Frankenstein.
But aren't you the grandson of the famous Dr. Victor Frankenstein, who went into graveyards, dug up freshly buried corpses, and transformed dead components into...
Yes! We all know what he did.
That stuff is funny because there's that sort of friction, that conflict between somebody who appears to be sort of dignified and in control of themselves and intelligent, dealing with these unexpected things, which is true all through the movie.
Even when he stabs himself in the leg with the scalpel, that doesn't feel like a parody joke. You know what I'm saying? It just feels like I don't know, it just feels natural, I guess.
Well, it's a very funny scene, and as soon as I saw the old man, I was watching it this afternoon. As soon as I saw the old man, I said, I know that guy from somewhere.
Blazing Saddles.
He was in Blazing Saddles, but he also was in Mary Tyler Moore show. He played
Oh, okay.
Ted Baxter's father. There was an episode where Ted Baxter's father comes back to visit. I don't know if you remember the Mary Tyler Moore show, but Ted Baxter was a sort of idiot newsman anchorman that they had on that show. And his father comes back. He's estranged from his father, and he visits one episode, and it's that guy. But he didn't get as beat up in Mary Tyler Moore show as he
Yeah.
does this. But yeah, the thing I remember when I saw this in the theater, because this is another, I know I sound like a broken record. There's another movie I saw when it first came out. The audience was really swept up by the story. You know, it was a sort of film where you could watch just for interest. It's actually one of the better adaptations of Frankenstein.
Yeah.
There are a lot of other serious attempts to do Frankenstein that aren't as involving as this one is, you know.
Yeah, I started just kind of going through some of the other ones. Son of Frankenstein, which this seemed to have copied more than in the other ones. Almost seems like it could have just been a comedy.
Well, I think by the time they got to Son of Frankenstein, they were sort of a little more aware. Well, that's not really true. Bride of Frankenstein was basically a sort of secret comedy. I think James Whale was pulling people's leg on a lot of that stuff. I suppose that's maybe the first camp movie, right? I mean, it's Ernest Thesiger, who I think is the only major character in the Frankenstein movies that isn't parodied in this film, right? There's really no equivalent to his character.
Yeah.
Maybe they thought that would be going too far, because he's a comedy character to begin with, so it would be impossible to make him into more of a parody. But that Son of Frankenstein has the business with the gendarme or the police officer with the wooden arm.
Yeah.
Lionel Atwill played in Son of Frankenstein. And you're right, a lot of those scenes do sort of play as comedies now.
I mean, like whenever
whenever
he first gets into town, and the whole town's there waiting on him, and he's giving this speech about how I know my father, had all this horrible stuff happen, and he's trying to defend him, and everybody just starts slowly walking away. Like they're just losing interest. I'm like, that's pretty good.
I quite realize that it was my father's misfortune to be the unwilling, unknowing cause of tragedy. I'm so sorry that I don't remember him, because I've been told that he was a good man. And I know how greatly your tragedy must have weighed upon his mind. I can't undo the wrongs that you've suffered, but I beg of you, let the dead past remain buried. My wife and I and our son, we want so much to be your friends.
Yeah, there's a lot of things that if you just pushed it a little further, it could be a bit of comedy.
Yeah.
But I mean, we talked about the Hammer films and compared them to the Universal films. The one thing that's true about all of those films, which may be something that a modern audience doesn't get, is that they were never meant to be taken as, how should we say, a realistic drama. They were always treated almost like fairy tales, a fairy tale setting, completely fictitious settings. And the characters, the actors that they picked to play the characters always had that sort of heightened melodramatic style of acting, which Basil Rathbone is absolutely a master of. Nobody does it better than he does. And Lionel Atwill, to see Basil Rathbone and Lionel Atwill going at it in that scene, that's just, that's perfect. But there's a lot taken from Bride of Frankenstein as well, including the famous blind man scene, the blind hermit, which I think is one of the funniest scenes in Young Frankenstein.
Oh, yeah.
And it also confirms my view that Gene Hackman is a brilliant comedian when he wants to be, when he gets a chance to be.
Yeah, the funniest part of that scene is he ad-libbed it. Was the I was going to make espresso.
Wait! Where are you going? I was going to make espresso.
And they have to like it said that they had to fade the scene out quickly because everybody was laughing. And he couldn't do it again without laughing, so that's the take they used.
Well, he's a funny guy. There's no question about it. And he to be honest, his performance up to that point
Yeah.
is really almost a complete duplicate of the guy who played it in the original part, at least as far as I can remember.
Yeah.
It's so close that it almost feels again like you're watching the original film. That's why when he's pouring the hot soup in the monster's lap, it's so hilarious because it's so you feel so convinced by the scene that when it takes that sudden turn, it's the comedy is especially effective.
Yeah, something I didn't realize until today for some reason. Whenever he's on the train, the first stop's in New York, and then the second stop is in Transylvania. So it's like this joke of like this train went.
Right, all the way to Transylvania. Yes.
Yeah.
And the couple sitting behind him are talking about the same thing, but they're speaking about it in English.
English and then German. Yeah.
Speaking about their kids' masturbation problem.
Yeah.
Yeah, the interesting thing about Mel Brooks films, and it's true about Get Smart and the other things that he was involved with, is that he's sort of like Monty Python and sort of like the Zucker brothers in the sense that once you get once you understand the comedy language that he's speaking, it all sort of falls into place. You almost start to laugh as you see the gags being set up. One of the things that Brooks likes to do is to throw in little references that a lot of people nowadays probably wouldn't get at all.
No.
Like when a train stops and he says, "Pardon me, boy, is this the Transylvania station?" And the little kid says, "Yes, sir, would you like a shine?" Well, that's the lyrics from Chattanooga Choo Choo.
Mm-hmm.
Pardon me, boy, is this the Chattanooga station? I think is the original line. Most people probably wouldn't get that. And there's stuff actually all through the movie that are references to things that probably most people wouldn't nowadays wouldn't have any familiarity with, including the Frankenstein movies themselves.
Yeah.
That's actually something that I find interesting. When you talk, or especially around Halloween, where we are now, we're just a couple of weeks from Halloween as we shoot this. For a modern audience, Frankenstein is really more a comedic character than the Frankenstein monster. This film and Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein are the two films that almost everybody seems to agree on that they love, especially around Halloween.
Yeah, and I would say the Munsters probably.
And the Munsters, yes. Yeah. That's interesting because we have a Munsters movie.
Yeah.
And I don't know what the first parody version of Frankenstein was, but it seems to me there've been a hell of a lot of them. If you discount the ones that have been done for TV, variety shows and things like that, I'm sure there have been thousands of those. And the Frankenstein monster has popped up in some unlikely places, like in the original version of Casino Royale.
Oh, really?
Comedy version. Yes.
Oh, they're okay, yeah.
Right. There's a scene where Bond is trying to escape from exploding headquarters, and the Frankenstein monster just happens to be walking past, and he asks him for directions. But the Munsters, Rocky Horror Picture Show, which I guess came out a couple of years after this, right?
Yeah.
75 or 76. Abbott and Costello and Young Frankenstein. The only other one that I can think of is Andy Warhol's film, Flesh for Frankenstein.
Yeah.
But I'm sure there are others.
So
that's something we can research and include in the notes afterwards. But why it should be that people find the parodies of the monster more interesting than the story itself is kind of, I mean, of course you have things like Frankenberry, the cereal, and you got Groovy Ghoulies. I don't know if you're familiar with the Groovy Ghoulies. That might be before your time. That was a cartoon series.
Yeah, I know what they are. We talked about them before.
Yes, I seem to remember that. So we're in an age where I guess the Frankenstein monster really can only be taken seriously as comedy.
Yeah,
that makes sense. But Young Frankenstein is kind of hard to beat because it is so accurate. The fact that there should be so many young people who've never seen the film, the original films, who love this movie so much, that's odd too. I don't know.
Yeah, especially when you think, what are they? Do they get any of the references at that point?
Right. Yes, unless they just sort of the trappings of Gothic horror films from that time
Yeah.
are so constant in the media that kids are consuming as they grow up, including the breakfast cereals and the cartoon shows, that maybe they understand that without seeing the movies.
Yeah, I don't know if it was because this story is mainly written by Gene Wilder that it has a different feel than other Mel Brooks movies. It's more like, the jokes aren't in your face.
Right.
There's, it seems like a lot of Mel Brooks's other movies are pratfalls and like blatant in your face jokes, you know what I'm saying? Where
Right.
this is more, it's honest, a different comedy. I think this is I think this is the best one. That's why I think it is the best Mel Brooks movie.
Well, he had the advantage of actually having a story, whereas
Yeah.
a lot of times when you're doing these type of parody films, this was true for the Pythons as well. The jokes are more important than the story. So
Yeah.
they have no problem breaking the fourth wall or for, abandoning certain plot strands because the story itself. I mean, a great example of that is something like Monty Python, The Holy Grail, which has always been one of my favorite comedies. But the film ends with somebody walking up to the camera, putting their hand over the lens,
I mean, Blazing Saddles ends with him watching the end of the movie.
That's right. Yes. So I guess the Pythons were not. That wasn't it wasn't an original idea for them. But that willingness to sort of throw the story out in favor of a good joke. That's like, for instance, in Young Frankenstein, I think I heard in one of the documentaries. I think I heard somebody say that Brooks was originally planning a sort of a last scene where like a curtain call where all the actors would come down that grand staircase towards the camera, maybe bow or something, including him at the end, Mel Brooks. And that was never used. But I would think one reason why it wouldn't be used is because in this film, they never do anything to break the reality of the situation. In other words, they never do something like what was done in Blazing Saddles with it turning out to be something being shot, right? Which is something that they do frequently in Python on the TV series. When they get tired of a sketch, they'll just pull back and the actors will walk off or walk onto another set for a different sketch. And they do it in the movies as well. Right?
I guess the biggest thing on here would be the Marty Freeman breaking the fourth wall like 5 times or something, but it's not nothing major. It's not like doesn't take you out of it.
And he's the character. He's playing a character where that's acceptable.
Yeah. If any other character, I guess maybe the Frankenstein character does it sometimes too. When he looks at the camera and gives that
very
look.
Yes. Which makes the blind hermit scene that much more effective because you can, by watching the expressions in the monster's face, you can see that he's fearing what's going to happen next. When the time comes to drink the wine and his stein gets destroyed, and he glances at the camera, But
who done the makeup? I mean, I noticed some of the stuff on the neck didn't look too good, but the head appliance looked really good. I wonder who done that.
Well, the thing on the neck is a zipper.
Yeah.
It's kind of a joke. I don't know. I think I heard that they got some of the old Universal. I assume in the 70s, all the guys that were still doing, the guys that had been doing the makeup in the 40s and 50s and 60s, might have done Bud Westmore's and those people, but I'm not sure. I know that they did have one, aside of the monster's makeup, they have one makeup effect, I guess you could call. They created a fake head of Peter Boyle, which had lights inside and a dimmer. So when he's being brought to life, you see that scene where his face is sort of glowing. And you see his skeletal outline in his teeth. I always assumed that was an optical effect, but apparently
I thought they just superimposed.
That's what I thought. Yeah, but it works nicely, and I guess that is an example of why this film overall works so well, because there's a lot of care put into it.
Yeah, I know that when Mel Brooks found out that the guy that made the original props for the laboratory and the Universal movies was still alive, he went and seen him, and that guy actually still had all the props.
That's right.
Rented them from him, and that's what's in this movie. So
Yeah,
That gives it like a really good look also.
yes, I looked up the guy's name and I found it, but I can't find it right now. Anyway, I guess he hung on to those things for years, and I guess he must have also have let Al Adamson use them for Dracula versus Frankenstein, because that might have been before Young Frankenstein
Yeah.
that all that equipment appeared in that film. So that equipment certainly got a workout. I don't know who has it now, but it's immediately recognizable, and of course it adds so much to the authenticity of this film. You know, it really does feel like because of those things, that attention to detail, the film feels like it really just fits right into Universal's catalog of horror films. Funny thing is, Universal, I suppose they could have made this movie. I don't know why they didn't. Seems like every time Universal has an opportunity to capitalize on all these franchises that they own, one of the most beloved series of films ever, right? I mean,
Yeah.
people are still talking about, as we are, still talking about Frankenstein and Dracula and all these movies that they made back in the 30s, movies that are, almost a century old. And yet Universal always seems to be a day late, a dollar short when it comes to another example. This is a little off course, but there's a Marvel movie now based on Werewolf by Night.
Yeah.
So they did that, or at least parts of it. Actually, it's not a movie. I guess is it a movie or a streaming series?
It's on their streaming service, but I don't know if
Okay.
it's a movie or a miniseries or.
So they did it in black and white, and apparently made an effort to make it look as much as possible or feel as much as possible like the old Universal films. And I guess that was a fair success. I don't know if it's.
It seems to be pretty popular. I've heard
Yeah.
a lot of the good things about it.
So once again, other people have success with Universal
Universal's property.
stuff, and Universal is lost.
They want to try to do a Tom Cruise movie.
Yeah, I mean, I give them credit. They did back away from that finally, I guess,
Yeah,
after
yeah.
the phenomenal, disastrous results that they got with the Mummy movie. But they don't. I think the problem is they seem to be a little embarrassed. It's almost as if they're stuck. There's a sort of a legacy that they're stuck with.
Yeah.
That they made a decision in the 50s, no more classic monsters. Dracula and Frankenstein and the Mummy had to hang up, and the Wolfman had to hang up their cloaks or shawls or whatever the fuck they were wearing. And that was it for the classic monsters, right? And from that point on, with the exception maybe the Creature from the Black Lagoon, or I guess it gets grandfathered into the classic monster category. But from that point on, they seemed to be allergic to doing anything with those characters, even to the extent of allowing Hammer and licensing the characters or their versions of the characters to Hammer rather than making those movies themselves.
Yeah.
That doesn't make sense to me. I mean, Marvel is a great example of a company saying, we're going to go back and we're going to dig through even the most minor character from 50 years ago or more, and we're going to do the best possible presentation of those characters and make $1 billion for each one of them. Universal seems to be sitting around scratching its head saying, nobody really wants to see this anymore, do they? And of course, if that's your attitude, then the movies aren't going to be very good. The only way that they seem to ever bother make any attempt to exploit those characters is at their amusement parks.
Yeah.
And I understand that they closed one of the last ones. They had like a diner or a restaurant that was monster themed, and they just closed that down. So one less tourist trap in the world.
Yeah.
That's nice too.
You figure that with the world of streaming services, they could do something.
Yeah. Well, I don't know why the idea of doing something in the style of the original movies with the original versions of those characters, why is that such a bad idea? It seems to me to be, I mean, other people have tried it, right? Van Helsing, the movie with Hugh Jackman. That
Yeah.
wasn't a good movie, but they clearly were trying something like that. Monster Squad, which is some people have affection for, that very obviously was an attempt
yeah.
at that. So, and you know, one could say maybe Universal is taking advantage a little bit of their connection to these franchise characters by doing the monsters. But there it seems to be, you know, they do as little as possible. They're unwilling to spend very much. The
Yeah.
most they're willing to spring for is to, you know, make a movie for streaming. You know, Rob Zombie was probably the most expensive thing involved in that
Probably,
film.
yeah.
So I'm mystified by their approach to things, especially somebody like myself. Both of the films that I've done have been, to a certain extent, tributes or homages to Universal's films and Hammer's films of that, you know, of that time.
Yeah.
So I don't understand why people who actually have the money and actually have the ability to greenlight projects can resist going back and saying, let's do this again. Wouldn't this be
Yeah.
good? And if anybody of them are listening, I have some story ideas, so we could go right into production.
Oh, yeah.
But anyway, but I guess perhaps because the only people that seem to be making Frankenstein movies other than Hammer back around the early 70s were people like Al Adamson with Dracula versus Frankenstein,
Yeah.
which is a terrible movie that I love. But it must have been disheartening to people who were Frankenstein fans to see him in that movie. And of course, you have like the Jesse Franco movies, which usually have softcore porn elements,
Yeah.
or you know, they're not the pinnacle of cinematic art. So maybe it was because of the absence of any sort of representation of the classic monsters in movies that Mel Brooks and Gene Wilder found this a particularly attractive idea. You know, they got to do it. They got to fulfill sort of a childhood dream of being able to make an old-fashioned monster movie.
Yeah, originally he went to Columbia, and they didn't want to shoot it in black and white.
Right.
So he went to 20th Century Fox. I think Alan Ladd Jr. had just got there, and he okayed the.
Alan Ladd Jr., who secured his place in movie history by simply saying yes to every
Yeah.
idea. It just so happened he came along at a time when saying yes to Star Wars, Alien, and this, and a bunch of
Yeah.
other movies turned out to be the right answer. So maybe that. Well, of course, I shouldn't say that, because every once in a while you have somebody like George Lucas or
Yeah.
Ridley Scott or Mel Brooks, but in other instances you have Michael Cimino coming in
Yeah.
with the Heaven's Gate. So it can go either way. But this is still a funny film. Still many things that I find very amusing in it, and it's interesting to watch even when it's not trying to be funny, because a lot of the stuff, like the creation of the monster, it's not constant jokes.
Yeah.
It's really just telling the story and doing those scenes in the most effective way possible. Film probably would have benefited from a different ending, I think. I always thought that it was a little unfortunate that the whole thing ends on a big dick joke.
Yeah.
That's but
that right there seems like Mel Brooks. I think that's what I think Mel Brooks wrote that part.
Well, possibly, yes. That seems to be more of like a Blazing Saddles type sense of humor. The dance scene, putting on the Ritz, which I have to admit, when I saw it in the theater the first time as a kid, I was worried about that. When I saw that starting to happen, I thought, oh, this is going in the wrong direction. But then when Peter Boyle starts singing,
if you're blue and you don't know where to go to, why don't you go where fashion sits?
that makes it work. That may be the secret here, is that with different performers, this might not have worked at all.
Now there was I'd read something about, I guess this story takes place before that song came out, or they used a version that came out after
Putting
because
on,
I guess the original lyrics had some racial stuff in it. I'm not sure.
uh, yeah, well, I'm running through the lyrics in my head. I don't remember
Yeah.
them all. They're very, I forget who did Putting on Her. Is that Cole Porter?
I think so, yeah.
Well, sometimes the lyrics have things in them that, uh, like, I forget which song Cole Porter wrote that refers to cocaine. I get no kick from cocaine. That's the
Yeah.
song. Yes. Now it's I get no kick from champagne. But there are a lot of instances of that sort of thing. So as far as the time, you mean uh, uh, the Frankenstein story is taking place before? Well, no,
Yeah.
actually, it's a contemporary story, right?
Right, yeah.
It's supposed to be taking place in the 70s. So the original Frankenstein movie might have been done before uh, Putting on the Ritz was written. I'm not sure. Was that what you were saying? I'm not sure.
I think I'm trying to find it out because I'm pretty sure that's the way I read it was like because they were talking about how trying to say the story, the year in the movie is different from what
Well, the year in
like
this
that.
movie presumably is 1974, right? It starts in modern day. So Cole Porter or whoever it was that wrote Putting on the Ritz wrote that in the 30s, I assume. And here we are both looking at our
Yeah.
devices, trying to figure out who wrote Putting on the Ritz. But in any case, his delivery of the song is what makes it funny. That I don't know how he came up with that idea of doing that sort of strangulated, and it's like it's perfect because it's sort of like this creature has no understanding what music is.
Yeah.
You know, he's just making a sound because he's been told to. So it's well, Putting on the Ritz, of course, was done by Taco. That's the that's the memorable version.
Yeah.
No, I'm joking. Irving Berlin, of course, not Cole Porter. So Irving Berlin would have been in the 30s. So I don't know. I don't know if there's any sort of time problem there, but in any case,
Yeah.
it's a funny scene. But
It is a good scene.
and all the stuff after that, I suppose you could say that it doesn't really. It probably could have been trimmed a little bit after that. Movie might run a little longer than it should. Some scenes that come along after that strike me as being
Yeah, with them capturing him and then his wife showing up, her fiance showing up, that all seemed like they were just trying to rush a different story in there and get it done with.
Yeah,
Almost like okay, we're done with that storyline of Frankenstein and the monster. So now what do we do now? Well, we got to bring in, bring some more stuff into it and then just end it. And that's kind of the way it felt.
well, the funny thing is that most of these Frankenstein movies that Universal did, they might have been not much more than an hour, 66 minutes or so.
Yeah.
Or so I don't know what the running time on this is. Is it 90 minutes at least? It's an example of the parody being longer than than the original movies.
Hour and 46 minutes.
Hour and 46, so a little.
Yeah.
Well, it's not a
It
boring
doesn't feel
movie at
like it.
all.
Yeah,
It
it doesn't
doesn't
feel
feel
like
like,
it. Yeah.
but it probably would have benefited after the Putting on the Ritz thing. Probably would have benefited some trimming would have made it, I think, a better film overall, and finding a different ending, other than the way it goes. I mean, I haven't heard anybody complaining about it, but the rape scene is probably
Yeah.
in some people's minds that would be a little out of order nowadays.
Yeah.
I don't know how he handled that in the musical. Presumably, he doesn't have women breaking out into song when they're being raped by a
Yeah.
monster. Right? But I guess you could say that since this is meant as primarily as a parody of those old movies,
Yeah.
it shouldn't be taken seriously.
Seriously, yeah. You shouldn't get in your head that if you woman starts singing while you're raping her, then it's all right.
Well, I have to admit, it does slightly diminish the enjoyment of those scenes, though,
Yeah.
because you can it isn't. I mean, it's an old comedy idea. That's sort of similar to the old comedy idea that all older men are interested in 16 or 17-year-old girls.
Yeah.
That was something you could joke about, even back when this movie was made. But it's not something that people want you to be joking about nowadays. And this probably falls into the same category. It sort of darkens it a little bit. But if you go back and you look at comedies from years ago, you're always going to find something that.
Oh yeah. Yeah, there's movies from the 80s. When I look back now, I'm like, that is not.
Oh,
that was not appropriate.
It's surprising because the 80s are not that long ago, and yet
Yeah,
they
no.
just really went way out on a limb with some of the stuff. It really
It makes you
was.
think, like, what was I thinking that I didn't catch on to that back then? Like, why
Yeah,
didn't I
we
see that? Yeah.
I guess it was the culture at the time. There were
I
just some
guess.
things that weren't, and I guess also because of by the 80s, we had fully accepted the extent of our freedom, in terms of what could be done in movies and what could be done on television. And so it was people who were taking full advantage of their right to express themselves, who had these old-fashioned ways of thinking about things. So you end up with a bunch of like teenage sex comedies, which was a very popular genre back then. As a matter of fact, there's some films that aren't even really teenage sex comedies that have elements of teenage sex comedy in them, like the horror movies, the Friday the 13th and Nightmare on Elm Street. They had that sort of feel of like what you would be normally seeing in a teenage sex comedy, and anytime you're making jokes about underage sex, you're on, thin ice, especially nowadays. But some of the biggest hits of the 80s, like Porky's, and they were all about kids getting it on in their van.
Yeah, Revenge of the Nerds. That's the movie that comes to mind whenever, whenever I start thinking about like stuff that was like just not right. Whenever they made it, and you look back now, and you're just like, I just don't know if I can watch that movie ever again.
Well, American Pie was fairly recently, right?
Yeah, that was just early 2000s, I think.
Yeah. So that trend, of I guess what they were always going for is there had to be a scene in it, like there's something about Mary, and in Porky's, and in what was the movie I just married? American
Pie.
American Pie,
yeah.
There has to be one scene that everybody says, "Oh, did you see where that thing that they did?" Some sort of gross thing, or some sort of sexual thing. That's the thing that by word of mouth brings everybody into the theaters. But it's funny, back then and also now, there are movies that have pornographic content in them. Putting aside actual pornographic movies, which are all over, available, at the press of a button. But there are movies that have X-rated, non-simulated sex scenes in them, and yet apparently, if you put some sexy stuff in a movie that's meant for general, audiences, that sometimes has the effect of making it that much more popular.
Yeah.
So it's curious. The same audience that would never rush out to see a porno movie, but if they find out there's some sort of near pornographic element in another movie, they're there with their money. Especially what they used to call the raincoat crowd.
Yeah.
But and I worked in a movie theater for a number of years, and it was a second run theater, kind of the asshole of the chain. We got all the stuff, that they didn't dare put in the other theaters, their prestige theaters. And we got a lot of teenage sex comedies. They all sort of blended together in my mind. It's like that whole decade seems like one
Oh
long
yeah.
teenage sex comedy. But yeah, some of the stuff it would today be considered bad taste at least, but
Oh
pretty
yeah.
shocking on the other. But Young Frankenstein, I noticed that even in that scene, because they wanted to, I guess, hang on to their PG. Even in the
Yeah.
rape scene, they don't even suggest he's taking off his pants.
No.
It's all her reaction to
Actually
him.
goes to black before he even lays down on her, I think.
Right. Yeah. So they were careful about that. But anyway, otherwise, very entertaining
What was
film.
there's one running joke in this movie that I don't get the reference on, and that's whenever they say the maid's name and the horses.
I am Frau Blucher. Steady!
Make their what is that? Is that a reference to anything, or
Well, I know
is
a
it
lot of
just a
people
jab at her
online.
looks? Like
A lot
she's
of
so ugly, even the horses
no,
don't even want to hear her name.
I think that the whole movie is parodying that style of melodrama.
Mhm.
And in those types of Gothic movies, one of the corny things that might be done, it would be considered corny nowadays, would be to have uh, somebody say the name of a character and then maybe a sound of thunder.
Yeah.
There's a scene in the original play of Dracula where there's it's a lot kind of like a drawing room mystery almost. They're sitting around talking about all the things that are happening to Mina or Lucy. I forget which name she was going under.
Yeah.
And just as they get to one point, they say something like, "Who could be doing this horrible thing? Or how could this horrible thing be happening?" Some line like that. And then the maid says, "Count Dracula," right at that moment. That's the sort of heightening of the
Yeah.
melodrama. So I think in this instance, the idea was the gag was she's such a strange and seemingly dangerous creature that even the horses are scared when they
Yeah.
hear her name. They whinny and try to escape. But it's not because the name means glue
Means
and
anything. Okay, yeah.
it's just a funny gag. It's really playing on movie conventions,
Okay.
and that's probably true of quite a few of the jokes in it. They're just it sort of reminds me of when I was a kid. I used to watch the Bugs Bunny and Daffy Duck cartoons because all the Warner Brothers cartoons up to the 1950s were all in the public domain. So local stations could run them all day long for
Oh, yeah.
free. And so when I was growing up, Bugs Bunny and Daffy Duck and Porky Pig and all those Warner Brothers characters, those were the characters that I really liked, much more so than
Yeah,
Mickey Mouse.
those are always my favorite.
Yeah. And there were, because those shorts were being done in the 40s during the war, there were a lot of references that went completely over my head. But in a way, it just made it that much more funny to me. It seemed more authentic. It was like trying to understand your parents' jokes,
Yeah.
So things like Bugs Bunny screaming at Elmer Fudd, was this trip really necessary? Or turn out that light. Those are all
Yeah.
things. Those were things that refer to wartime slogans and things. They were trying to discourage people from taking unnecessary trips. And during, I guess, air raids, they would tell people to turn off
Turn
the
the lights
lights.
off, yeah.
There are other things like there's references to particular types of, I guess you used to get a rationing coupon for your car, so you get so much gas every month, however they worked it.
Right. Yeah.
And they sometimes reference that in the Bugs Bunny cartoons.
Yeah, they always had, and I guess it was more of a commercial at the time, but they always, seemed like a lot of those cartoons, they had the wartime bonds,
Right,
like they were
right.
trying to sell them to you.
Yeah, a lot of stuff like that that probably, I mean, it's also true of Monty Python. If you watch the original show, there's a lot of jokes about British politicians that
Yeah.
weren't known even at that time by Americans. But it doesn't really affect the joke because, uh, I mean, politicians are the same all over the world.
Yeah.
We know them even though we don't know the name. We know what they get up to, so the jokes still work. And I guess that's it adds a level of authenticity and depth and texture to even something as superficial and frivolous as a cartoon when you have those little references in it.
Oh,
Be
yeah.
interesting. I don't think I've ever seen anybody do like a study of all the references to social, political, cultural things that were happening in the 40s, references that ended up in the Bugs Bunny cartoons.
Yeah.
Be an interesting thing to study.
Yeah, I think that I mean, the Marty Freeman character, he was just like so good, and he had all the best jokes. The their wolf and
Werewolf.
Werewolf?
There. What? Werewolf. There. Castle.
Why are you talking that way?
I thought you wanted to.
No, I don't want to.
Suit yourself. I'm easy.
and
Yeah.
of course, and they kind of, I guess they're kind of making fun of, poking fun at him when he tells tells him to turn there's a light switch. He turns it on, it starts sparking. Damn your eyes, and too late.
Well, Marty Feldman made a career out of having those funny eyes.
Yeah.
So he seemed to be going out of his way to accentuate them.
Oh, yeah.
He's like 5'8", which I guess is about an inch shorter than me. But in this movie and in a number of other films, he seems much shorter for some
Much shorter.
reason.
Yeah.
Hunched over completely, and the idea of the hump switching size, that's a cute gag.
Yeah, I think I
Uh,
read that. I think just off, like not while they were filming, he would kind of move it around. And it became so funny that they wrote it into the script.
Well, that's what you need, right? I
Oh,
mean,
yeah.
somebody who immediately, as soon as he sees a prop or a costume thing, says, "I know what we can do with that," right? He has an idea. He had his own shows and he did his own sketches and things like that. So it's kind of unfortunate that he died as young as he did,
Yeah.
because there might have been some more great things if he had gotten past Yellowbeard. There might have been some more great things that he could have done.
Yeah, I think the Walk This Way, I think that was a joke that they just kind of made up, and then Mel Brooks put it in like other movies that he done after this.
Well, I think that line, "Walk This Way," that must have been such a common gag, maybe in vaudeville or because that even is referenced in Monty Python.
Yeah.
They have a thing where the guy says, I guess the original joke was somebody goes into a drugstore and asks for powder, and the guy says, "Walk this way, sir," and he says, "If I could walk that way, I wouldn't need the powder."
Yeah.
All of these other "walk this way" things are like variations on that, but my understanding was Brooks was actually thinking of cutting that whole thing out, and he told the editors, leave it in for the preview, but then take it out.
Yeah.
And it got such a big response at the preview that when they asked him if he wanted to cut it out, he said, "Are you crazy?" I mean, it is. He apparently would bring in like secretaries and from studio to watch bits that they had
Yeah.
done to get their reaction, to get a genuine reaction rather than the reaction of the suits. I have to admit, with some of the stuff that I've gone through on my films over the years, it always seems like the people that are in charge of the money have no understanding of what,
Yeah,
what is
yeah.
good and bad. They simply can't see or understand what is good and bad. It sort of makes you long for a person like Alan Ladd Jr., who would just say yes to everything.
Yeah,
You know?
yeah, whatever. I don't know what I'm doing.
I don't know why it is that somebody would be willing to give an artist the money and then question
Question everything
all
they
the
do. Yeah.
decisions that they make.
Yeah.
But it doesn't seem like that was a problem with Young Frankenstein, but certainly is a common problem of people who have no experience actually making anything, the people that are entirely involved in, pushing papers around or taking meetings. Those people seem to think that they have an unerring sense of what works, and they're wrong. It's an erring sense of what works.
Yeah.
But what can you do? That's, it's a problem is that ultimately they have the last word very often.
Well,
And also there's no logical way to argue some of these things, because sometimes it's just a question of intuition. In that instance, Mel Brooks's intuition was take that joke out because it's a cheap joke.
yeah.
It's maybe too obvious. And then when he saw the reaction of the audience, he realized that he was wrong. So your intuition isn't always right, but you don't have anything else you can go by, right? There's no rules to making a comedy. There's no rules to making people laugh. Everything you might say, everything, like if you got Jerry Lewis or somebody like that who was, egotistical enough to think that he could sort of lay out rules for how to be funny, he might be able to give you a whole bunch of rules, but almost immediately people will be making films where those rules are broken and they go on to great success. Right?
Yeah, I think what makes that joke work in this movie as opposed to when he used it later, because in the later, when he used it later in the movies, the person had a funny walk, and that's what they had to emulate.
Right.
Where at this one, it was the fact that he handed him his little tiny cane and made him use that. I think that's what makes it work.
And the fact that Gene
and then Gene Wilder's like, "What am I doing?"
Right. Yes, he starts to do it, and he says, "What am I doing?" Yes, that little things like that little expression that he has on his face when he decides not to.
Yeah.
That makes the thing work. That makes it funny. Also, again, the cast. I mean, all of those people just seem to be naturally funny. And it really is worth mentioning again what a terrific cast this is.
Oh yeah, Kenneth Mars as the inspector was just brilliant.
He's
And he
very
was
funny.
in the producers too, right? Didn't
That's
he
right.
play
Played
the guy that?
playwright.
Yeah.
Yes. So he if I remember correctly, the playwright in that was also had like a German accent, and he also wore a Nazi helmet.
Yeah, yeah.
But the Madeline Kahn,
Oh yeah, she's great. I love her.
great.
She's like one of my favorites.
And obviously Feldman and Wilder and Peter Boyle and Gene Hackman, Terry Garr,
Cloris Leachman. You can't go wrong with Cloris Leachman.
Yeah. Leachman, I tell you, another person from the Mary Tyler Moore Show.
Yeah.
And there are a lot of people that claim that they don't like her character on the Mary Tyler Moore Show. I've always been very fond of that, of Phyllis. She is a really brilliant comedian. Or she was. I think she passed away.
Yeah. I think the only people that are still alive are Mel Brooks, Terry Garr, and who else is still? I know there's at least one person that's still alive.
Well, Madeline Kahn, is she still alive?
She died back in the 90s.
Well, Peter Boyle has passed away. Woody Feldman passed away.
Maybe it's just the two then.
Well, I'm glad to hear Terry Garr is still alive, because I know she was
Yeah.
having health problems for a while. So that's she was always a favorite of mine, and for a while there, it seemed like she was in everything. She was even in Star Trek, for Christ's sake.
Yeah, I remember that episode of Star Trek, because I think they were supposed to do a spin-off of that
That's
episode.
right. That was the Gary 7. That was like a backdoor pilot for another series. But she was around quite a bit. I mean, I haven't bothered to catalog all her TV appearances up to that point, but she seemed to be all around during that period. But I think that this might have been her first big film role. I'm not sure. She must have gone right from this to Close Encounters. Didn't Close Encounters come out? Oh no, Close Encounters was in the 70s.
70s.
It was in 77.
77. Yeah.
This was 74, so there might have been some other things. But she, she's been in quite a few great films. So, and she has that ability well, she has the ability to play comedy, which is rare enough. She's attractive, but she's also funny. And she also is, she has a sort of, she conveys a sort of naivete. We
Yeah.
buy her as this character, it's not like somebody playing a character like this. We think she is just as innocent. And that really is the only way that like the jokes, some of the jokes are kind of corny or like she says, would you like a roll in the hay?
Roll
And
in the
she
hay, yeah.
actually literally wants to roll in the hay. You need a good comedic performer to make gags like that work. And
Yeah.
she is that.
Yeah, so Terry Garr, Mel Brooks, and Gene Hackman are the only survivors. I don't know why we
That's
forgot about
right. Gene Hackman is
Yeah.
in his 90s. He's retired. He's writing books now. So yeah, he would be the other one. And Mel Brooks is still active. You still see him popping up from time
Yeah.
to time.
I don't think he's doing any. I don't think he's done anything lately though.
Yeah, other than interviews and things like that, I haven't seen him in
Yeah.
any movies or TV shows or anything. Did he pop up on Larry David's show? I have a feeling I heard.
I think he was on a couple episodes earlier in the show.
Well, Terry Garr, when she did that horrible movie in the 80s, The Sting 2,
Mm-hmm.
which played at the theater I worked in, just to give you an idea of what I'm talking
How
about.
bad it was, yeah.
Right. She went on talk shows and she was talking about how, because she was in that movie with Jackie Gleason, because naturally, if you're doing a sequel to a movie with Paul Newman and Robert Redford,
Yeah.
you get Jackie Gleason and Mac Davis. It's a natural. But Terry Garr is in that, and she mentioned in the interviews that her father had been I don't know if he was like a vaudeville comedian, and her father always had resentment against Jackie Gleason because he supposedly, according to her father, stole his act.
All right.
So some of the things, I don't know what was Reginald Van Gleason or the Poor Soul or character, which of his menagerie of characters that he supposedly stole from this guy. But apparently Terry Garr mentioned that to Mr. Gleason. I don't know what happened as a result, but interesting that Mr. Gleason, who from other stories I've heard, was not the nicest guy all the time.
I don't think that I don't think Terry Garr liked Gene Wilder too well either.
Oh no.
I think I just seen like a little thing where it said they asked her what it was like working with him. She said it was a jerk.
He was a jerk.
I don't know. I'm reading it, so I don't know what the context of that. I'm saying if she was joking or whatever.
Maybe she was. Yeah.
Yeah. He doesn't come off as a. I don't know. He just
No,
he always come off as a nice guy. Yeah.
Always in his interviews, he always seems like very smart and pleasant.
But I'm sure interview on TV is different than working on the set. You know what I'm saying? Like,
I think generally from what you hear, of course, all of this there's always a publicity aspect to all these things that people say, but they said that generally this set was a pretty happy set. Everybody seemed to get along. Everybody seemed to have a good time. If you look at the bloopers, it just seems to be everybody cracking up, snickering or, roaring with laughter.
I think there was one. I think Mel Brooks and Gene Wilder, I think they had one fight on the set. I don't remember what was over. But I guess Mel Brooks stormed off and then called Gene Wilder on the phone and said, I don't know who that was you had in your apartment yelling, but don't ever have him back in there again, referencing himself.
Well, I guess it's inevitable if you have two people that feel strongly about something, that it's going to lead to some arguments.
Yeah, especially when one of them wrote the script, one of them's
Right.
directing it, and also, chipped in on the script. I'm sure there's going to be some disagreements they're going to have.
Well, I know that on producers, he had a lot of trouble with Zero Mostel. Zero Mostel, that I guess was Mel Brooks's second film. I think he did the 12 Chairs and then the producers, if I got the order right. And Zero Mostel, when people, somebody said, the director has asked you to do this or that, he said, director? What director? That's not a director. And apparently they had real animosity. Whether or not that can be explained in any way, I don't know. Maybe Mel Brooks hadn't quite developed the ability to handle larger than life figures
Yeah,
like Zero
right,
Mostel.
yeah.
Zero Mostel had an interesting life, and he went through a lot, and he seemed like a very a big person physically and in
Yeah,
terms of personality. So maybe Mel Brooks just hadn't, because Mel Brooks is kind of a big personality too.
yeah,
So maybe the two of them just naturally butted heads, but it resulted in a brilliant movie. So
oh yeah,
I think it's interesting that Mel Brooks did 12 Chairs is an amusing film. I don't think anybody would single that as being a great film. But the producers, Blazing Saddles, Young Frankenstein, Silent Movie, all of which were, range from good to great.
yeah,
They're all solid, at least very solid comedies. And there was a real excitement during those years when those films were coming out that, people would say, oh, there's a new Mel Brooks movie. That would be something you'd have to
oh
go to
yeah,
see. And then after, I guess it was High Anxiety was the first one where maybe it wasn't as big a hit, and then it seemed like he never really recovered his
yeah. I
momentum.
think my like the last movie that he made that I really enjoyed was probably Spaceballs.
Spaceballs, that way, yeah. But even that wasn't really a hit when it came out,
No,
right?
it wasn't a big hit. I mean, I enjoyed it. I loved it. Of course, I was younger when I seen it. It was, that was sort of that kind of goofy comedy.
Right.
But like his later stuff after that, just like I really don't care for his Dracula Dead and Loving It.
Yeah.
I know he was spoofing the later movie, but I really wish he would have done what he done with this one and spoof the
Right.
original
Well, I think that
39
was
Dracula. That would have worked out better.
that may be the biggest mistake on that Dracula parody.
Was doing the
Dracula. Right.
yeah, Francis Ford Coppola version.
In Young Frankenstein, he said, we're just doing this. We're just doing the 30s Universal Frankensteins. In the Leslie Nielsen movie, he seemed to want to do everything. He wanted to do the Coppola version. He wanted to have a little Bela Lugosi. He wanted to do, the whole range. Even
it just didn't work.
Little vibe of George Hamilton in that.
Yeah.
May not have been intentional, but by that time, there had been so many Dracula spoofs that maybe nobody could have done. It may have some fun scenes in it.
Yeah. Well, what it felt to me more like he was almost like now he was ripping off like the Naked Gun movies.
Right.
That's the kind of comedy it was in it. That was just this ridiculous, like when they're staking and like the blood just keeps spraying. I'm just like, that's not funny. Like, I mean, it's funny, but it's not like intelligent funny, I guess. It's just more goofy, more goofball comedy.
Right. Well, I think that with Naked Gun or Airplane or with Brooks's great movies, a surprise is an important part of what makes them work. It's when you see these sort of corny old tropes or conventions being turned on their head, the surprise of that makes it funny. But if you're seeing somebody doing jokes about something that has been joked to death,
oh yeah,
then it really can't. I mean, I don't know how you could do a Dracula comedy anymore.
I mean, that's what made the Airplanes movies funny was everybody played it serious.
Yes.
I mean, Leslie Nielsen was just dead serious of the whole thing. It was hilarious. I think if he would have played a Dracula like that, it would have been great.
Right. Yes. Well, he might not have been the best guy for Dracula all around, but the Airplane movies were a direct parody of a certain set of films. The Airport. And there was also another movie, I forget the name of it, that had a very similar plot to what we see in Airplane.
Yeah.
So they had sort of like a template that they could use. They had something that they could bounce off of.
Yeah, I think the passengers and the pilots being poisoned was from one movie, and then the majority of the passenger happened to land the plane was from like one of the Airport 74 or something like that.
Airport 75, yes.
Yeah.
Karen Black's entry into the series.
Yeah.
There's so much. That's another example of movies that almost seem like they're begging to be made fun of.
Oh yeah.
There's so much in Airport 75 that just is hilarious, you know. In a way, I'm sorry that can't think of anybody who's doing what Mel Brooks or the Zucker brothers
No, not
do right
anymore.
now, you know.
I guess the last would have been, well, actually, that was the Zucker brothers. I was gonna say the scary movies would have been but they did write those, or they started writing them. They wrote the first two, but so
well,
I guess those were the last ones.
one problem is that with these movies, enough time had passed between the thing that they were making fun of and the movie
Yeah,
so that you could say, well, that's firmly established. Everybody knows what we're talking about. It's not something that was a joke for 5 minutes and then disappeared.
yeah.
Nowadays, with the movies that you're talking about, Scary Movie, was it Scary Movie? Yeah, I guess that was the parody of the
The Scream. It
Scream
started off
movies,
as a parody of the Scream movies. Yeah,
right. And the problem with that is their references were for movies that were
just out last
in
year.
theaters in that week, you know,
Hmm.
and it's like that's not really, that ain't going to work over the long term, you know. I mean,
No.
contrary to what I was just saying about how we can find comedies funny even if we don't get the references, but if the whole thing is, you know, if the joke is just a reference to some other recent movie, that probably is not going to be a movie that's going to have a long shelf life.
Yeah.
And I would say, I suppose, I don't know how many scary movies they did, but
There was a decent amount of them, and of course it got ridiculous to where it was just that's all it was. There was no actual storyline. It was just every scene was a parody of something from another movie.
right. Well, fortunately, they seem to have stopped now.
Oh yeah, thankfully.
So this would be a good time. Although comedy, as they've often said, is really hard.
Oh yeah,
So,
I always imagine that'd be the hardest thing to write. I would say I used to think mystery, like a murder mystery, would be hard, but I figured, well, you start with the murder, and then you just work your way back. So I think comedy probably would be the hardest thing to write.
yeah, I mean, coming up with a mystery that has a unique or original twist, that's hard. Yes.
Yeah,
But
but
people
yeah,
can
you
be
can at least
entertained.
work backwards from it, though,
Right,
right?
right.
Yeah.
Well,
Where with a
people,
joke, you can't really work backwards from the
well, I
joke.
mean, your success or failure is immediate, right?
Yeah,
People know in real time while they're watching the movie if there's laughter, and if there's no
yeah,
laughter, then you're failing, right? I mean, there's some comedies that I like, not because they're hilariously funny, but because they have a gentle sort of good humor, and they're not meant to be falling down funny.
yeah,
And sometimes those films and TV shows can age better than the, you know, flat out hilarious stuff, because the flat out hilarious stuff, after you have a good laugh at it, you know, it's not really something you're going
it's
to
not as
enjoy.
yeah, yeah. Once you like with a pratfall, it's like, well, I already seen that, so
Well,
I'm
if
not
I
gonna
can,
laugh at that every time.
if I can risk your sanity by making another Mary Tyler Moore reference,
Oh, you're good.
Mary Tyler Moore show was on for like 7 years, and for the first several seasons, I don't know if you have any familiarity with this show. Do you
Yeah,
know
yeah,
anything?
yeah.
First several seasons, it was all about Mary, mostly Mary at home, and her the people who were in the apartment building with her were the characters in
Right,
the
yeah.
episodes. It's Phyllis, played by Cloris Leachman, and Rhoda was Valerie Harper. And those episodes for the first few seasons were always criticized as being not as funny, not as good as the later episodes when they shifted to an emphasis on The Office, Lou
Yeah.
Grant and Ted Baxter and Murray Slaughter. And they had a much sharper, might even say crueler sense of humor in the later episodes of the later seasons of the series. And I used to feel that way because I used to watch this show in syndication. It used to be a regular part of my day for years, really. And recently, last time I rewatched the series, I realized I really prefer the earlier episodes.
Right, yeah.
Because when you watch the later episodes, you see the construction of the joke. You can't get to those really sharp
Yeah.
jokes without sort of building to it. And you have to sort of cheat sometimes so characters don't behave the way they should, right? So you're sort of damaging the integrity of the character just to get this really big laugh. And also passage of time and the different attitudes about things, but particularly about how people are treated in the workplace, have made some of the things unacceptably cruel and mean-spirited, you know. So that sort of makes the early episodes, which aren't quite as funny, admittedly. They don't have the joke, but they're not really trying for that. They're going for a sort of softer, gentler kind of humor. And it seems to me that that works better over time. I mean, some of the episodes maybe are too sappy to go, but I don't know why I brought that up. Maybe you can refresh my memory. I'm an old man and I lose my way very easily. It's a good thing that I'm not running for president and they accuse me of having Alzheimer's. I guess the point that I was trying to make is that sometimes you know, laugh out loud comedies aren't the things that last.
At last, yeah.
Young Frankenstein might be an exception, although you could argue that it isn't a movie that goes for the laughs, as you said. It doesn't go for the laughs all the time.
Yeah, the only joke I really didn't, I don't know if it's even a joke, but the only part I didn't really find hella humorous was when he gets to the little girl. She's at the, you know, they're in the original movie, throws in the lake, obviously, and he sets on the teeter totter and launches her through the bedroom window. It's like, that's kind of cheap.
Well,
it didn't fit this movie for some reason.
I know what you mean. Even when I saw it the first time, I thought that that was kind of a disappointing scene.
Yeah.
And I realized the problem that they had. I mean, in the original film, he drowns the girl.
Yeah, throws her in the lake and drowns her. Yeah.
There's no way to do that in a comedy, right? So I guess that's the best. They wanted to have that scene because
I think they could have just ended on, because she says, "Oh, well, what do you want to do now?" And he looks at the camera like, all right, well, you know what's coming. I think they could have ended it there. They didn't need to do the launching her through the window.
I think the problem with that would have been people would have said that they were suggesting he was going to rape the little girl.
Oh, okay.
You know, which that's not.
Yeah.
I don't think he can do. The monster really is not seen doing anything to anybody.
Yeah,
It's completely, even more so than the original movies. He's completely, an innocent. So that's a tricky spot to be in. What do you do, especially when you're talking about killing little girls?
Yeah.
That's a hard one to make people laugh about. You know? But but that's probably not the biggest laugh in the movie.
Yeah.
You know? And they apparently had to go through all the trouble of hooking the little kid up to a cable to fly her into.
And it just looked cheap. It looked, I don't know. That was probably my least favorite joke in the whole movie.
Well, in the original movies, it's interesting. The monster, maybe this is because of censorship rules at the time, monster really doesn't commit that much havoc. I mean, the little girl he drowns, you could almost say accidentally.
No,
misunderstanding.
He doesn't know,
Right. And any time he actually kills somebody intentionally, it's usually off screen. And sometimes it seems almost like a plot device, like they have to have him kill somebody so that the villagers can, break out their torches and go on a rampage. But I guess with the original movies and with this, they always want to keep the audience on the monster's side. They don't want. That's another thing that changed about the character as they got into the 60s and 70s, and exploitation filmmakers started to use the character. They basically turned him into a serial killer, you know.
Oh yeah.
So, but one of the funniest scenes, in my opinion, is the abnormal scene.
Yeah.
And Gene Wilder, after almost being throttled by the monster, calmly sits down and has a chat with his employee about that brain. That wasn't.
Now, that brain that you gave me, was it Hans Delbrooks? No. Ah, good. Would you mind telling me whose brain I did put in?
And you won't be angry?
I will not be angry.
Abby someone.
Abby someone. Abby who?
Abby normal.
And when he says Abby something,
Yeah.
Abby normal. That his reaction, Gene Wilder's reaction to that's hilarious.
Yeah. I don't know. I like the charade scene also. I think
Yes,
that was
set a
funny.
give.
Yeah. Just the fact that they do the entire charade
Twice.
gimmick, yeah, through the whole while he's being choked. I think that
Yes.
was hilarious. Yeah.
Yes, that was very funny. There's a lot of things that I can see why so many of the actors in this have said in recent interviews that they'll meet people that basically can do the whole movie. They remember all
Yeah.
all the dialogue, because it is similar to Monty Python's films. It's the sort of film that really inspires that kind of fanaticism. But and Monty Python is and the Holy Grail is similar in that there was also that sort of intense attention to detail. You know, wasn't just a comedy about King Arthur. It was one of the best films about King Arthur, just from a visual sense. You know, it really felt perfect for that time, and it sort of was announcing the arrival of Terry Gilliam as a very an important filmmaker. So Mel Brooks actually ended up doing another black and white movie, or being involved with another black and white movie, The Elephant Man. He produced
Oh, did he?
that film. Yeah.
Wasn't
So
there another one that he made that was High Anxiety in black and white?
no, I don't think that was in black and white.
Okay,
As far as I know,
for some
it was
reason I
in
was thinking there was
color.
another one that was in black and white, but I guess there wasn't.
Well, it's tricky, obviously, to get the studios to go along with black and white, because
Silent
that's
Movie wasn't in black and white either.
no, they did that
Okay,
in
I
color.
must just be remembering wrong then.
Because silent movie was really it was in a sense it was a done in the style of a silent movie.
Yeah.
It was a silent movie. Matter of fact, I think there's only one word spoken in it. It's spoken by Marcel Marceau, if I
Yeah.
remember. But I guess they just figured I can't do this twice. I can't get away with, because he was lucky with Young Frankenstein. It didn't affect the box office at all.
Yeah.
But to do that twice would be to risk becoming the guy who does movies in black and white, which, I guess he had no desire to. Also, the silent movie wasn't a sure thing the way Frankenstein was.
Yeah.
I have a feeling that people would have gone out to see that movie just on the basis of the fact that it was about Frankenstein. But silent movies don't have the same sort of fanatical, especially if you're just talking generically about all silent movies.
Yeah.
It doesn't have the same sort of attraction. I find that period in film history fascinating, but I have to admit, if for entertainment purposes, I probably prefer to watch a documentary about the silent movies than the silent movie themselves. It's just that the copies of silent films that we have been so poorly preserved. They've aged so badly that it's a difficult thing to watch silent movies. And also, I think we talked about this before, silent films require complete attention of the audience. You can't look away, you're going to miss something, because the whole thing is being done visually. And that makes it kind of a chore for a simple mind like me, who's used to multitasking and having a bunch of different things going on while I'm watching movies. You can't do that with a silent movie. And obviously, the style of acting and the style of storytelling that was popular back then is quite different from the way things are done now. So they're hard. They're usually pretty hard for people to watch now.
Yeah.
Maybe Nosferatu, horror movies, interestingly, Nosferatu and Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, and science fiction movies like Metropolis. Those are the ones that you hear mentioned the most.
Yeah.
Funny thing is, I never really thought, and maybe I'm showing my stupidity here, I never thought that Nosferatu was that great a movie, and I certainly don't think it's the best F.W. Murnau film.
No, I like I like it, but I like the 79 version better.
The 79 version with Klaus Kinski.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, and certainly you see that quite a difference there, right?
Yeah.
Quite a difference a couple of decades make. But then the original version always struck me as being kind of primitive in a way, in terms of the storytelling. I mean, it's visually impressive, of course. It looks great, and he's certainly a fearsome-looking creature. But the people that list that as their favorite Dracula movie, I suppose it could be on the list, but I certainly wouldn't list that as my favorite.
I mean, I always appreciated it for the time it was made and what they were able to do, but I don't think it's the best.
Yeah. Well, that's an interesting thing. I would say that probably if we were able to go back and watch all the silent movies that were popular back then, we'd find a lot of them are very sophisticated
Oh yeah,
things. They're not primitive at all. I have a feeling that when he did that, when Murnau did Nosferatu, he might have felt that he didn't have to rise to the same standard because it was a story about a vampire,
yeah,
but anyway, I mean, I still like it. I'm not the aspects of it I think are very effective, but I don't think it's Murnau's best film.
No.
But
If
anyway,
if I'm gonna watch a Dracula movie, I'm not gonna put that one on though.
well, yeah, I probably
Yeah.
wouldn't mind. Although to give it credit, I don't think it's very long, so it's not like
No.
you'd suffer too much if you wanted to watch it. Cabinet of Dr. Caligari is an interesting watch.
Hmm.
But and Metropolis, it's long. I mean, that's the interesting thing about silent movies. A lot of them are fucking unending things. They
Yeah.
just I forget what director it was. Eric von Stroheim. For one of the films, he came back with a 5 hour cut of it, and he had to be convinced to cut it down.
Cut
He
it
got it
down,
down to
yeah.
3 hours. But back then, I guess it was a different thing because theaters were an important part of people's lives. Going to the movie house was a big
Oh yeah.
deal. So, but I still don't know how you'd ever get anybody to see a 3 or 5 hour movie, even back
No.
then.
I don't think I've seen anything longer than just your normal. I guess maybe 2 would probably be the longest movie I've ever seen in a theater.
Well, 2.5 hours is probably the outer limit for
Yeah.
most people. Yeah.
Like I didn't see JFK in a theater. I've never seen Titanic, so
Is that over 2 hours?
pretty sure.
Yeah. Well,
I mean, I like
maybe
JFK. I enjoyed watching it at home on VHS, but I don't think I could have sat in the theater
must have been a
that
lot of
long.
VHS tapes. But Titanic and Lawrence of Arabia, movies like that, maybe because of their epic scope,
Yeah.
Ben-Hur, Ten Commandments, maybe those movies can dare to go to 2.5 or 3 hours. But I mean, it's largely, at least in the theater days, it was largely, when theater exhibition was the important thing. It was really a question of being able to squeeze in enough shows to make the theater profitable.
Well, yeah. Well, plus
Yeah.
back then you didn't have a lot of. They weren't showing like 10 movies a day, so that what I'm saying. You go to the theater now, they're 10 movies are playing.
Yeah,
So
well,
they gotta try to they gotta fit in as many showings as they can of each movie.
right, multi-screen theaters,
Yeah.
and yeah, and back then it was one screen, one movie at a time,
And a short.
oh yeah, well that's true. They did have a lot of the programs were always that. Maybe that's why people didn't object to getting movies that were like an
Oh yeah,
hour.
because you'd
long.
have a cartoon,
Right.
start your movie, sure they had intermission.
That was the thing that my parents were always telling me about is what the theater going experience was like back then. They used to have dish night where they'd give away dishes and
Yeah.
live performances, and the newsreels and the cartoons, short subjects, any number of different things. And that all got,
World War II propaganda films.
well, that would come, yes, that would come with your, sometimes came in the movie itself.
Yeah.
But I guess it was after the consent decree, uh, and the theaters started, the distributors started focusing on making epics.
Yeah.
They pretty much eliminated their B movie. This major studios
Oh,
pretty
yeah.
much eliminated the B movie category, and that's where AIP and people like Roger Corman got their big break, because the studios weren't making those. They weren't making movies like Frankenstein anymore.
Yeah.
So they were able to become suppliers of product to drive-ins and to independent theaters. So all these things the changes that have happened in the industry, and it seems to be nonstop, even now, major changes are happening all the time. They actually reversed the consent decree recently, so
Yeah.
the distributors, the studios will be able to own theater chains again. Probably not a good idea.
Probably
Not
not.
surprising that that happened under Trump.
Yeah, I'm sure Disney will probably own a lot of theaters and just show their films.
Well, this might be the reason why they didn't rush too quickly to get into all streaming.
Yeah.
It seemed like for a while there they were tempted when the pandemic hit. They thought, well, maybe this is the time to just make everything day and date. Streaming will come out the same time as the films are released in the theaters. And then several of the studios seem to back away from that.
Yeah.
Might be because now that they can actually own the theaters as
Theaters,
well,
yeah.
that might be a good thing in the future. If all you need is some hit movies.
Oh yeah.
You get
If
some
you-
hit movies, then you can really make a nice bit of money if you own the theaters, right?
If you want to see this great picture, then come to our theater and pay us $50 to see it.
I know they used to have a thing they used to call floor walling. I don't know if they
Yeah.
do it anymore. You've heard that term?
Yeah.
I know, like with like Thunderball, when that came out, Bond was such a big thing that the distributor just floor-walled the theaters that it was opening in, so they'd get all the money.
Oh yeah.
All they had to do was pay for the operation of the theater, the staff and whatnot, and then the ticket price, everything that came in was theirs, which is a pretty good idea if you're sure that it's going to be a hit. And in
Yeah.
that case, they know it was almost certain to be a hit. But that's also something back in the 60s, they had the roadshow thing, which they don't do anymore,
Yeah.
where they would put it in one theater and play for, pick a big theater like Radio City Music Hall with a lot of seats, certain amount of prestige. They did this with Star Trek: The Motion Picture. Matter of fact, that might have been one of the last. Nowadays, of course, with I think probably with the success of Jaws and Star Wars, they decided that nonsense of doing slow
yeah.
release. Put it out in every fucking theater in the country all
Everywhere,
at
yeah.
once. Make your money, or sometimes all of it back within the first weekend. Right?
Weekend, yeah.
Seems like some of the Marvel movies are on their way to making $1 billion after like a month in theaters.
Especially after they start including, I guess they start opening on Thursdays now, so they include that in their weekend so they can say they make more money.
Right.
And of course, once they start doing the midnight opening, what I'm saying, like when I seen the Star Wars prequels, all three of them that I went and seen were midnight showings, actually Thursday night, so they would count that money as their opening weekend.
Yeah, well, I have fond memories myself of back in the 80s going to see a lot of the movies as supposedly sneak previews.
Yeah.
Like a few days before the weekend when the film was supposed to open, they would put it into a theater, at like 8 o'clock at night after the other shows, the movie that was normally showing, they would sneak preview it. And that was a great way to sort of generate interest and excitement, but it was also a great way to add to your opening box office. Because if your movie's been running for a day or two before its official opening, that makes it look like it's a big hit. But and of course, people can't help but be excited about anything if they feel like they're a privileged few that are getting into seeing a sneak preview. It was kind of funny to have a sneak preview that's advertised full-page ads in all the newspapers. But there were quite a few times when I would show up for those things, and there were literally lines around the block. We'll start here and go all the way around. And sometimes people would come up and say, "What is this for?" Because it wasn't even clear. There were no theaters here. Star Trek II actually was one of those where I was actually waiting all the way around the block to get in for a sneak preview.
Yeah.
But and it was such a big, successful sneak preview, they had to run it 2 or 3 times after that to accommodate the crowds.
Yeah.
But I don't hear that sort of thing other than, as you say, them opening Marvel movies early. You don't really hear
sneak preview or anything like that
anymore. But well, they seem to be able to make their fortune anyway with these movies. it's the Marvel thing is also, it seems to be a license to print money. I don't know when the steam is going to
Oh,
run
yeah.
out of it.
I'm pretty much done with it. I'm not gonna.
You're not a Marvel fan anymore?
Well, I mean, I am, but I'm just done with their movies. Like, I can't follow the rest of these storylines or like they're done with what I started with Iron Man, which
Right.
I guess they were calling Phase 1 through 4. That's pretty much done with this last the Doctor Strange movie. So a lot of the storylines now are on streaming, and I'm not paying for their. So I'm just whatever.
Well, I guess it was a brilliant move to sort of integrate all that stuff together so that
Yeah,
movies are all sort of connected and all the different franchises are connected, and even bringing in the TV series so that it's all, a constant supply of product to the
yeah,
addicts that they've created. But it all goes right past me. I can't really see what the attraction is. I used to be a superhero fan, but
yeah. I
uh,
mean, I mean, I had to finish that storyline they were doing, but after that, I'm just like, okay, I don't need it to watch anything else after
you're
this.
done. Yeah. Well, every time there's another big hit superhero movie, I say, well, we're probably getting to the end now.
Yeah,
But it doesn't seem to be happening. So I don't know what needs to happen in the world before people move on to something else. I suppose inevitably they will, but right
yeah,
now it seems that we're pretty much stuck with superhero movies. So we either learn to like them or find something else to watch.
yep. All right, so I finally found it here. It says says that this movie was a loving tribute to the Universal Frankenstein that ran from 31 to 45. The version of Putting on the Ritz uses the revised lyrics of 1946
Uh,
because of the racially insensitive original lyrics. So now I'm interested in looking up those original lyrics and see what it says.
well, I don't know if I'm right on this, but even that line from uh, Chattanooga Station, that
Mhm.
might also be when he says, "Pardon me, boy." He might be referring to a black shoeshine person in
Right,
the
yeah.
station. In this movie, in Young Frankenstein, it's just a little German kid
Yeah.
or little Transylvanian kid or whatever the hell he's supposed to be.
Yeah.
But yeah, well, it sort of shows how common these little racial insults were, and they probably weren't even meant as
Probably not,
insults.
yeah.
People didn't even think about it. That's one of the better things actually about the Universal films is there's really no reference to race at all.
No.
And I remember reading that, we might have discussed this when we talked about the Hammer films. The black audience at the time was very strong for the Universal horror films. As a
Yeah.
matter of fact, for the latest sequels, I remember reading an interview with somebody who was involved with Universal publicity, and they said that they almost were being made for that audience past a certain point. And I often wonder why the black audience would be so interested in something that has no black characters in it.
Yeah.
And I think the reason is because it does completely avoid race. I mean, a black audience member can sit and watch those movies and not have to worry about being insulted by some
Yeah.
stereotypical character on the screen. And also, it might have given them a certain amount of satisfaction to just see how fucking crazy white people are.
Yeah.
Because there's nobody in any of those movies that acts like a normal human being. Uh, but it's an interesting thing. Uh, Plenty of other movies from that time, of course, uh, had pretty offensive racial stuff. The
Oh,
Fu
yeah.
Manchu movies, for instance, they're pretty. Actually, Mask of Fu Manchu, which Boris Karloff starred in, which is a good film. It's beautifully designed and it's very entertaining, sort of pulp type movie. But it's almost openly racist.
Yeah.
They don't make any attempt to hide the sort of yellow peril philosophy that's behind it. And of course, Birth of a Nation set
Yeah.
the standard for that back in the silent days. But anyway, so that's not something that you have to worry about too much when you're watching the Universal films. or when
No.
you're watching the Hammer horror films.
No.
So there's no discussion of race because everybody, no matter what ethnicity they supposedly are, they all speak with British accents.
Yeah.
So you get around the whole problem.
All right, so Young Frankenstein, do you recommend this one as a Halloween movie? Watch it
Oh
watch it
yeah,
around the spooky season.
I think it would work very well as a Halloween movie, and it makes a good companion piece with things like Abbott and Costello. And I suppose if you want to stretch a point, probably wouldn't feel out of place with something like Rocky Horror Picture Show, which isn't
Yeah.
something that I've ever been a particular fan of.
Me
I
neither.
know a lot of people enjoy that movie, so those would be. I don't know, although my preference would be for Flesh for Frankenstein, the Andy Warhol.
Yeah.
But I don't know if that's one I can recommend to most people. That's not really something you want to put on a Halloween party.
No.
Well, maybe at certain parties, depends,
Maybe, yeah, depends.
but not something where children are present.
Yeah, I definitely recommend it. Like I said, it's like just thinking about today, I think it is my favorite Mel Brooks movie. I think
Yeah.
it's like his, even though I guess he really didn't write the whole thing, I think it's still directed wise and just visually it's the best one. And
Yeah.
you can't go wrong with the cast. I love everybody in this movie.
It is
Just
almost perfect.
no
in that
one in
regard.
it that you hate.
Yeah.
I recommend everybody watch it. I watched it on I know you sent me a copy, but then they also had it's on HBO.
Oh,
So they had a really good copy on there. That's the one I watched today. But yeah, I recommend it.
yeah. It's a very entertaining film, and it works well as a film, and it honors the original films. I think
Yeah.
the affection for the original films comes through. That attention to detail sort of suggests that they really cared about getting it right and paying tribute to those films, and that wins them a lot of extra points in my book.
Yeah, and there's not a
So-
lot of you don't have to get every reference. It's still funny, even if you don't
No,
understand the references.
Yeah, I don't think that should. Most people are not going to be bothered by that. I don't think.
But yeah,
There's some things that I'm still trying to figure out. I don't know what the reference to kippers. I don't know. I don't get
so the
that.
what?
There's a scene where Debbie Garr and Gene Wilder are having breakfast, and he picks up a big plate of kippers and says, "Kippers."
Oh yeah, I don't know that. I don't know either.
Don't get that. Maybe it's some reference to cuisine in German cuisine, but they're not in Germany.
Yeah, I don't know.
But that'll be a topic of research.
Yeah.
When I have an opportunity, I'll try to figure out what
All
that
right.
means.
So where can everybody find your movies at?
Both of my films, Demon Resurrection and Sleepless Nights Revamped, are available on Amazon Prime Video, pay-per-view, and they're available for free on platforms like Plex and Tubi and Roku, and a new one called Mometu, which is apparently just appeared recently. So folks
They
can
just pop
see.
up out of anywhere now.
They just come, and then new streaming service, especially free with ads. New ones seem to be coming all the time. So the Sleepless Nights, Amazon Prime and Plex for now, more coming, and Demon Resurrection, all the other ones I mentioned, Tubi and Roku and Mometu and Vimeo, VHX, and probably a bunch of others that I don't remember.
You probably just search, Google search, and it'll show you all of them.
Should be pretty easy to find, or people can check out my Facebook pages for Demon Resurrection and Sleepless Nights. My account on Facebook or Twitter, they should be able to find all that information. And I would suggest after they finish watching Young Frankenstein for Halloween, maybe they could squeeze in some time to watch Demon Resurrection or Sleepless Nights.
There you go. I recommend it both of them. I got the shirt on, Demon
That's
Resurrection
right.
shirt.
You got the Demon Resurrection
Now we
shirt.
just gotta get a Sleepless Night shirt, and I'll have the
That's right.
full
Yes.
catalog on.
Well, I'm working on that, and we'll have something soon. And there your cat
There's the
arrives
cat
just
making an
in time.
appearance. Yep.
Perfect timing. Just in time to say farewell.
Yep. All right. Well,
Why
this
why
is.
isn't the cat wearing a Demon Resurrection shirt?
I couldn't get one small enough. So
They do sell those, I think.
yeah, I'll try to get one. All right. Well, this was a good episode. Until next week, we'll continue to watch the good, the bad, and the cheaply made.
Thanks, Doug.
Damn your eyes! Too late.